Time to go. I'm going to stop sharing.
All right, good. All right. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Window to Your World seminar. A part of our signature programs at the International Cultural Center in the Office of International Programs at Auburn University. I am pleased to be here, and my name is Adeola Fayemi. I am the manager of the International Cultural Center, and I'm so happy to have everybody here today. What is the International Cultural Center's mission? What do we do? We have three main areas that we try and focus on. First of all, we want to engage domestic and international students. We want to make sure that international students are able to benefit from domestic students and vice versa. We want them to be able to feel a sense of belonging, to feel a part of Auburn family as quickly as possible. So we have all kinds of programs trying to get the students together, educational program, experiential programs. This is one of our missions, because when we do graduate Auburn students, we want them to have participated in a number of global programs where they feel competent as a global citizen, where they feel they can compete in the 21st century. That is one of our missions. The second one is to leverage the strength that international students bring. Most of the time, we try to help international students, and we do have a lot to gain from what they bring from all over the world. So we want to leverage their strengths, whatever they bring, their cultures, their attitudes, their way of life, way of thinking. We want to be able to have a knowledge of that. And to the extent that we need this, or it helps our education, we want to make sure we are able to tap into that. Thirdly, we want to enrich the curriculum of faculty. We have a number of experiential programs on our website, which we will put in the chat. And we want faculty to direct their students, ask them to come for extra credits to our programs. They're experiential, they open people's eyes, they widen their horizons, they feel they understand the international students and vice versa. And so it's all around a win-win situation. So that's what the International Cultural Center is about in general. And I am happy that our Assistant Provost is here with us today, Dr. Andrew Gillespie. He's always very supportive of us and makes sure that we are able to do what we do. That is about the International Cultural Center. By the way, I should have some members of my class, the honors class 2087 here today. And I know that Mary has her class here today. Mary Diamond has her class here today. And they are here to participate, and enjoy the program. We are very blessed to have a group of expert panelists here today. And they've come from different facets of life. They have various expertise, both from a personal and a professional aspects. And I would like us to get to meet them. Like to introduce them to you today. There are 5 of them, and I'm going to give the floor to Susie Webster to help us with the introductions of the panelists today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Susie Webster. I work with Dr. Fahimi and the ICC team. First, I'd like to introduce to you and welcome Dr. Elijah Gaddis.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Gaddis. Dr. Gaddis is an assistant professor of history at Auburn University. His research focuses on material, cultural, and spatial histories of African American people in the South. As a public and digital historian, Dr. Gaddis has currently a variety of exhibits, built numerous online archives and projects, and run oral history initiatives. Much of his recent public work history has been through the Community Histories Workshop, based at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Gaddis focuses on community engagement and collaboration, creating historical interpretation in unexpected places. Welcome, Dr. Gaddis.
Thank you so much.
Next, Dr. Frederick Kam. Welcome, Dr. Kam. Dr. Kam is an internist and Auburn University professor who serves as the executive and medical director of the University Medical Clinic. He has for the last 24 years. For over 6 years, he served as a faculty member as well as of the Miami School of Medicine, where he ran the Student Health Center, as well as private practices of the Department of Internal Medicine with a portfolio of responsibilities of over $33 million annually in budgets. Dr. Kam is an award-winning and active member of numerous professional and civic organizations, and he has lectured nationally and internationally on numerous topics. Thank you, Dr. Kam, for joining us. Next, Ms. Kerry Baharanyi.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Ms. Bahari. Ms. Bahari is a licensed independent clinical worker with a private independent practice and a concentration in clinical social work, social casework, and social work administration. She also provides wellness coaching and consultation for anyone in the state of Alabama and outside of the state of Alabama. Ms. Kerry's areas of interest are in policies affecting women, people living with HIV/AIDS, immigrant communities, and sexual race minorities through civic engagement. She is engaged in her community through volunteering, activist work, and she is also a poet who believes in the power of the written word as a tool to free oneself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have our Miss Sumaiya Islam.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you, Sumaiya. Sumaiya is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Chemical Engineering at Auburn University. She is originally from Bangladesh and has been living in Auburn for the past 4 years. Alongside her research and academic successes, she has served as both president and vice president for the International Student Organization at Auburn University. During her time at Auburn, she has worked persistently to improve relationships between domestic and international students in the Auburn campus. Welcome.
Thank you.
And also we have Dr. Wunapini Muhammad. Thank you, Dr. Muhammad.
I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Muhammad is an assistant professor of global media industries in the College of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Georgia. She earned her Bachelor of Arts degree at the University of Ghana and a master's degree at Michigan Technological University. She completed her PhD in mass communications with a minor in women's, gender and sexuality studies and an African studies concentration at the Belisarial College of Communications at the Pennsylvania State University. Her research, which focuses on feminisms, broadcast media, development, communication, indigenous African media, and political economy of communication, has appeared in several academic journals. Thank you, and I'll hand this back over to Dr. Feeney.
Thank you so much, Susie. A few housekeeping things. I was just thinking, pre-COVID, we would have the smell of food, provide lunch and beverages, and have people see face to face. That is suspended for the moment. We are looking forward to a post-COVID period where we can all treat you to lunch while we have this informal gathering. But this will have to do for now. And so I have a few housekeeping items to let you, to talk to you about. Please mute your phone, your devices when you come in. And when we are done with your presentations, we have a Q&A session. So please enter all your questions while the presentations are going on through the chat system. We are lucky to have Laura Fuller, Ms. Fuller from the School of Graduate Studies, who will help us with our Q&A session today. Also, let's see if I missed anything. I think that's all I have for housekeeping. Okay, so we're going to start now. The topic again is face coverings around the world, health, cultural attitudes and symbolism in the COVID-19 era. I was reading an article by Brookings that discussed a national panel study on COVID-19. It found that 40% of Americans who do not wear masks say it's because it is their right as an American not to wear a mask. 24% say it's uncomfortable. A combined 64% of Americans believe that their right not to have to be inconvenienced by wearing a mask or scarf over their face is more important than reducing the probability of getting sick or infecting others. All over the world, though, more than ever, people are wearing masks and face coverings, bandanas, hijabs, veils, especially in the COVID-19 era. We are here today with our distinguished speakers to try and unpack the ideas and psyches behind face coverings and masks, and in particular to discuss the situation in the USA. In the USA, face covering mandates have exposed and is causing tensions between personal rights, collective well-being, rebellion, political flashpoints, and conflicting messages. Do we really need to wear masks to combat or deter the spread of the coronavirus? How and what are we to make of all of this? Starting with Dr. Gaddis, you have done a lot of research in the area, in this particular area. What are we to make of all this? What are masks? How do people see it around the world?
So I want to give perhaps a somewhat counterintuitive look at masks around the world, and very different, I think, from what a lot of other people are going to talk about by digging a little bit into the history of masks and their symbolism. So arguably masks are something that go back to some of our earliest recorded historical traditions. So Celts, for instance, wore masks as part of ceremonies to ward off evil presences. The masks were meant to kind of scare the malevolent spirits that they knew to be present in the world around them. But today I want to talk principally about masks as a symbolic custom, as something that we don to disguise ourselves, as something that we put on to kind of inhabit another person or another place or another time. And I want to do this particularly by talking about masks in an Afro-Caribbean context. Can everyone see my screen okay? Can I?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So the earliest kind of masking traditions that I'd like to talk about are what's called mumming. And these really come about in the medieval times in Europe in particular. And these were celebrations where people would don masks around holidays, around Christmas and Lent in particular. And the masks were a way of kind of going out and celebrating, experiencing pleasure, either around the holiday or particularly around Lenten practices before denial, fasting, all these kinds of things. And so particularly on the left here, you can see this English mummer dressed up. And what he is doing is going around door to door, knocking on doors and asking for treats, asking for money, for food, for drink. That should sound familiar, probably to a lot of you. This is kind of where the tradition of trick-or-treating and Halloween come around today. But originally, it was a way for poorer people, those in the sort of lower and working classes, to go around and get some small amount of, again, food, drink, charity, right, from wealthier people in the country. This practice really got picked up and sort of moved once the enslavement of African peoples across the globe really picked up. And in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, in the Bahamas, in various other places, we saw the emergence in the 18th century or so of a practice called by a variety of names, but generally known as John Canoe or Jun Canoe. And what John Canoe did was, in the true sort of style of the Caribbean, it mixed these English, French, and other sort of mumming traditions, right? This idea of masking with African traditions, likewise of masking and of holiday celebrations. And on the part of the enslaved people who took part in these celebrations, they would put on these really elaborate masks as part of these incredibly ornate costumes. You can see an example of one of them here and another of them here. And what they were doing here, particularly in this first image that you can see, is they're putting on masks that are a kind of exaggerated version of the white enslavers here in the Caribbean, right? They're kind of mocking their ridiculous mannerisms, their sort of ridiculous pretensions, right? And what they would do would be, as we saw in these earlier mumming traditions, go around from door to door, either on the plantations or in these cities, and demand these small amounts of tribute, of money, of food, of liquor, of these other little kinds of treats. Eventually, this moves to the mainland U.S. when you have people coming from the Caribbean, enslaved peoples being moved from the Caribbean, sold from the Caribbean into what is today the United States South, places like North and South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. And they brought this Jun Canoe tradition with them. And it moved and sort of transitioned in the United States, where they began making masks and other costumes with the things that they had on hand. But still, it was a practice, right, of going around, of demanding tribute from these enslavers, and of mocking them, right, of sort of making fun of them. And so in that, we can see this kind of slight inversion of society, right, just for one night, for one day, where the people who are sort of put at the very bottom of society are briefly allowed to inhabit this other kind of persona, right? And the mask is the thing that allows them to do that. So this tradition of John Canoe continues in the Caribbean, where it's still a massive holiday in Jamaica and the Bahamas and other island nations, but it also continued in the United States, where after emancipation of enslaved people in the 1860s, we continued to see these formerly enslaved people and then their descendants take to the streets of these southern cities in these elaborate costumes, right? And in particular, these elaborate masks. And this is a time, many of you will know, when African descended people get their freedom, but are stripped of many of the rights, human rights and rights of citizenship to which they should presumably be allowed to have. And so what John Canoe, what this kind of masking tradition allows them to do is for one day, right, for one night, they get to dress up, they get to make fun of the white people who are still in charge, they get to briefly sort of speak truth to this larger power. They get to briefly demand forms of equal treatment from those who are in power. And I think that's a wonderful place to end, because I think it really gets at the historical significance of masks. On the one hand, we have these really mundane, these really fun ways where we sort of disguise ourselves, where we put on the persona of someone else for a day or for a night. Think of Halloween, which many of us will be celebrating right in about a month here. To the much more significant, right? John Canoe and other masking traditions that allow people who have been disempowered to temporarily inhabit other people, other roles, even other time periods. Often, as I've suggested today, this has been for the positive, though I have to suggest before I go that it is also allowed for acts of violence and crime. If we bring this to the United States, we can think of the white terrorist organization, the Ku Klux Klan, who have been so prominent in states like Alabama for the longest time. But for most of us, masks have given us license and some small degree of freedom from normal expectations. And so I couldn't help but think of that when comparing this to masks in the COVID era, right? We are figuring out increasingly, as we wear masks every day, how we can use them to express ourselves, to express our own sense of style and sense of self. And I think masks are allowing us some small degree of expression, of freedom, of maybe even normalcy during these really exceptional and unusual times. So I'm going to end it there and look forward to hearing from the rest of the presenters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gaddis. That was so instructive to me. I've never related all those things at all to the tradition of Halloween, to where it came from the Caribbean, you know, and to the power dynamics you talked about, and then to our current situation where we're using masks for some kind of self-expression. That is so enlightening to me, and I'm sure it is to a number of our the audience as well. Very interesting. Okay, Dr. Kam.
Good morning. Go ahead.
The U.S. in terms of the medical, from the health perspective, what are we doing with masks, and how should we be thinking about it?
So, from my perspective, you know, at this point in time, this is a respiratory virus, and the science says that masks is probably the most effective preventive strategy against a respiratory spread virus. So, yeah. So I wanted to, if you'll allow me, I'll make a few comments specifically as it relates medically to the pandemic that we're dealing with. Dr. Gaddis, I grew up in Trinidad for the early part of my life. So that's where I was born. So carnival and dressing up in costumes and occasionally wearing masks was definitely a part of my life. So yeah. First of all, I want to say that thank you very much for having me. I do want you to know that the opinions that I express in this presentation are mine and is based on scientific data, public health strategies used for communicable diseases, and good medical judgment. I have no conflict of interest or financial disclosures to make to anyone that I believe would be an issue. So let's get started a little bit. You know, we are really living in a very interesting time. And unlike Y2K, for those of you who remember when Y2K and the lead up to Y2K was coming, this particular virus is impacting us directly or indirectly and everyone on planet Earth. Okay, there doesn't seem to be any entity that's being spared from the effects of this virus one way or the other, either directly or indirectly. You know, this week we crossed a milestone with over 1 million confirmed premature deaths due to COVID worldwide. This from a virus that we didn't know anything about prior to 9 months ago. I can still remember that email that I sent Andy Gillespie on January 9th. I sent him an email and he'll remember that, which is when the concern started to be raised here. Worldwide, we've had over 33 million cases, over 7 million of those are within the United States, and that's resulted in just over 205,000 deaths. But please understand, all of these numbers are grossly underestimated. Okay, that leads to my tenets. And my tenets are the following. We must learn to live with this virus as it will continue to impact us for the next few years with or without a vaccine. Okay, and no matter what we do at Auburn, or locally, or statewide, nationally, or worldwide, vulnerable people will continue to be vulnerable. Okay, we cannot make anywhere safe. We can only make it safer. We will need to continue testing and isolating and tracing and quarantining, but the degrees and strategies will vary with time, and we need to educate and focus not just on the physical needs, but also on the mental and social needs in what has become a fast-paced marathon. Okay, consistently wearing appropriate mask, physically distancing but socially connecting, sanitizing hands, cleaning highly touched surfaces, and limiting social group sizes is what has worked so far and what needs to continue. The virus really has one mission, okay? And that is to find someone who is not infected and infect them. The virus does not care about your social status. It does not care about your political affiliations, doesn't care about your age. It just wants to find an uninfected host and infect you, okay? It's really going to take a collaborative effort at all levels to combat this invisible enemy, which does not cause symptoms of any kind in 40 to 80% of people who become infected, yet it has caused very new complications like blood clots and lung pathology that we had not seen with any of the other viruses that we've dealt with in recent times. This is really unprecedented. So there's no playbook nor template to use here. No person alive has had any experience of managing a pandemic like this. The last great pandemic was in 1918. Some of us, like myself, have had the experience of professionally dealing with the AIDS epidemic, or the original SARS scare, or the swine flu that came through across the world and hit Auburn back, I think, in August 2009. And we're using that experience along with available data to make decisions. When no data is available, and that happened in the first few months, what there was not definitive, then we use good common judgment. So my mantra has been and continues to be, there's what is possible, there's what is practical, and then there's what is reasonable. And the challenge is what one may think is reasonable, someone else does not. All right. This is a respiratory virus. So respiratory spread, be it droplet or aerosolization, is what we predominantly need to focus our mitigation of efforts on, especially face coverings, airflow, as well as size, location, and duration of gatherings. This is also a very contagious virus. So physical distancing, limiting group sizes, and limiting indoor activities will continue to be ongoing mitigation strategies. Places like bars and concerts, churches and jails, nursing homes, gyms, campuses of all types still seem to be venues which the virus likes to execute its mission. So what can you expect? Well, we're going to expect that we will have multiple spikes around the United States and countries in the world. If you look right now, some countries in the world are seeing their second wave coming through, okay? And that's affecting them in Europe, Canada, and other places. Some are already, and it doesn't matter what processes that they put in place. The reality is, at the end of the day, we all have limited control over the personal accountability of each person in their private lives and adherence to the preventive strategies. And especially so in the United States, like Dr. Gaddis alluded to, about your personal rights and freedoms, etc. Those all come into play. Some countries, you're going to be fined or arrested or detained or whatever if you don't wear facial coverings or if you don't adhere to the quarantine or isolation requirements. We have had very few detainments in the United States. A year from now, next fall, we will know a lot more about this virus, as it will be just as contagious and just as disruptive, but we will be more resilient. A typical new vaccine takes about 7 years to develop and bring to market. We will have multiple vaccines available, but probably not until sometime early next year, which is pretty remarkable. Never in the history of modern medicine has the world's healthcare scientists focused their efforts like they have on SARS-CoV-2. Unfortunately, having vaccines available does not work unless people get vaccinated. We also do not know and will not know about the length of immunity the vaccines will give us until we've had a couple years. The virus has been mutating, but fortunately not to an extent yet that will make these vaccines obsolete. Regardless, we all need to protect vulnerable people on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, by using good judgment. We must continue to encourage personal accountability from everyone, especially in their private lives. There's not one right answer or one right way to do everything. This is unprecedented, so there's no, again, real prior roadmap or game plan. Some of this stuff, we're making it up as we go, okay? And as we get new challenges, we come up with new potential optional solutions. So wearing effective good face masks, sanitizing hands, maintaining physical distancing, but encouraging social connectedness and avoiding large gatherings will consistently work as preventive strategies. So I will end here, and I guess when we get to question and answer time, I'll be happy to address any questions. Thank you so much. I think you're on mute.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cam. And wow. So this is going to be a way of life for a while. And we should pump up our personal accountability for this virus to be able to combat it. I was particularly struck when you said the mission of the virus is to infect people. So we do have a battle on our hands not to get infected. And knowing that we should do all we can as personally and from a societal standpoint to make sure we don't get infected. Thank you so much. We'll come back when we have the questions and answers. Okay, Ms. Kerry Baharanyi, from the behavioral, environmental, cultural, and stigma point of view, why are we resistant to wearing masks when Dr. Kam has just told us that it's so important to us combating and reducing the infections from the virus?
Thank you so much. That's a great question. I want to bring at the forefront some concepts, social construct. I'm coming to you not just as a practitioner, but as a global citizen. And by the way, I'm wearing myself a headscarf, right? And when I'm wearing this, I'm sure all of us, we have some thoughts, maybe some assumptions, but you'll never know the reason why I'm wearing this. It could be because of my devotion to my culture. It could be maybe my religious devotion, or it could be just my sense of style. You will never know until we have this dialogue and discussions. So some of the concepts I want us to think, when you think about human behavior in the social environment, I want you to think about some of our beliefs, some of our values, some of the core and the norm that make up our society. Think about how the personal affect the collective. With my client, when we unpack trauma, it could be a present trauma, I always encourage them and lead them to make connection, to connect the dots, right? We have to go back in the past to understand how the past affected our present, and hopefully the present can lead us to a better tomorrow or future. So if we think about different paradigm or construct or concept with the United States, right? I've been living in this country for 22 years. My country of origin is the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I am going to bring up some concept, again, like I stated, some construct. I want you even to write them down and let me know what are some of the thoughts and emotions that you feel. So I'm gonna think about and speak about slavery. I'm gonna want you to think about human trafficking, exploitation, discrimination. What about criminalization or even exclusion? What does that bring to you? What are some of the thoughts? These are some of the facets and experiences of many of us. Maybe yesterday, but we're still grappling with all these effects today. But the United States is also a space where, or a country, a nation, when we think about freedom, we think about the right to choose, self-determination, right? So in my practice, when I work with clients, I have the right to protect the confidentiality. They have the right to privacy. However, we always discuss about my duty to warn. For example, if a client is a danger to self or to someone else, I have to break the confidentiality. So going back to wearing the mask, when we think about the pandemic era, my question for all of us is to ponder on this. You may think you don't need it, right? Because again, it's a choice. And remember again, for this country, for people here, self-determination and the right to choose is very important. Remember, because where we're coming from, at some point those choices were taken away. But when we think about being your brothers and sisters keeper, maybe you don't believe the mask is good for you, or you don't need it. What about your mother, your father, your sister, your sibling, your community? What about them? So thinking about the personal vis-a-vis to the collective, again, there's a cultural component to that. We have to change our behaviors and we have to think about each other. So I'm encouraging everyone to question your thoughts, your emotions, your values, and your norms about face covering, about wearing masks. When you have those emotions, ask yourself, why is this challenging to me? But at some point, we have to be on the same page and think about the bigger picture, is health. Without health, we cannot do anything. It's probably one of the most important things. With my client, we've been having challenging discussion. I have the privilege to still work with my client, telehealth online, and we have been discussing about when is the best time for all of us to go back in the office face-to-face. So we're setting boundaries. Wearing a mask is actually a duty for all of us. And when we discuss, we think about why is this important to you. So with my client, I say, I don't just show up as a practitioner. I show up as a daughter, as a sister, as a community member. When I go back home, I come with a whole nation, right, behind me. So my client truly understand that we're not just representing two people in a space. We have a community. So then it's our duty to definitely be there for each other and hopefully be healthier so that maybe a year from now or next year or 2 years, our lives will be a little bit better. But face masks are here, I think, to stay. Face covering is a norm in many other cultures. Make it fun. Be expressive with it. But think about your health. Think about our health. It's very important. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kerry. The number of things you said that I picked up on. First of all, the health focus, of course, and the need for us to not see ourselves as just one person, but to see ourselves in the community, as a member of the community, with so many people depending on us, and that we do have the duty to make sure that we keep our community whole. And I think that's a good way to look at it. And your last advice to make it fun, make it an expression of ourselves, I think would if we really take it to heart, really bring the resistance down to a greater extent. Thank you. We'll come back to you with questions. Okay, and you did say that it's a norm in many countries of the world, many other countries of the world. Sumaiya, could you tell us country-specific, give us specific country-specific information about how people see masks in your country of origin?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. So first of all, before I start, I would like to say that beyond my introduction as a doctoral candidate in Auburn University, I have actually spent different parts of my life in different countries. So I grew up in Saudi Arabia, and then because my parents used to work there, and then I went back home to my original country, Bangladesh, and I had my undergraduate study there, and then I came here from my graduate studies. And so I've actually had different experiences throughout my life with face coverings and head coverings. And I am very happy to be able to share my experiences with all of you here. And for that, I've actually prepared a little bit of a presentation for everyone. So I hope you all can all see. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So when we talk about face coverings before the COVID era, one of the first images that would come into our mind was this. And this image is of a woman covering her face. And this is a very common scene in predominantly Muslim countries. And this picture is very well is often associated with the head covering and the word hijab. What I have found through my experiences is that there is a misconception of the word hijab in Islam. And actually, according to the religion, there is a very broad definition of the word hijab. So in the Arabic meaning of the word hijab is basically barrier or partition that separates two people. And but in Islam, there is actually a broader meaning, which includes the principle of modesty, includes behavior and how you dress for men and women. So when we talk about face coverings, that were already existing before the COVID era, we had two different things two different categories. One was Muslim women who were covering for the sake of religion, for religion, and there were also other cultures who already have the tradition of covering their face. So for Muslim women, hijab is used as a more generalized term for any kind of head covering or face covering, but it is mainly used to mean the head scarf. There's actually no uniform style for what it should look like. But what I've shown here is predominantly which is more common. So we have the hijab, which is the headscarf, and then we have what is called a chadar, which is like a cloak that they put over the head, and they put it all over. It covers their entire body. And then for face covering, this is one of the most common, is called the niqab, where you can only see the eyes and it's covered. And then another common covering is the burqa, which is an entire cloak that covers from head to toe, and you just have a mesh on the face. Actually, there are, as you can see, I've listed, there are many different types of head and face coverings that depend on culture and tradition and purpose. If we go into details, it's going to take a little, but there is actually very different types of head coverings depending on where the location and the purpose of it. Now, this is a scene. I have actually picked out everyday common scenes from different parts of the world. If you can see on the right top is basically the scenes that you commonly see in urban locations in the Indian subcontinent. This is a scene from actually from my own country, Bangladesh. Even the top middle one is actually from rural areas in Bangladesh, where you see women covering their head, women covering their face. And on the left top is actually a common scene in Iran, where where conservative women predominantly wear the chadar. And on the bottom right here, on the bottom left here, on the bottom left here is actually what we see in Afghanistan. This is actually a picture of Afghani women, and they wear the burqa, which covers them from head to toe. And on the right here, you'll see this is basically pictures of women from Arab and African countries where they wear the black cloak and also cover their faces with a niqab. But there are also other cultures where they have face covering, a tradition of face covering. In North Indian states, especially in the rural areas, there is a practice of a ghungat, which is basically women have to take a part of their clothing and they cover their face with it. And also nomadic tribes, men of the nomadic tribes in Africa, they wear turban head coverings and face veils to convey respect and dignity, and also as a protection from sand and sun. So the hijab or the face covering, as from my experiences, I've seen that it is often misunderstood as a sign of oppression on Muslim women by the men. And I've even been asked, are they forced to wear it? But I have taken clippings from women who have actually given interviews. And in reality, for most Muslim women, it is a matter of choice. They say that when they're asked, are you forced to wear it? They say, I choose to wear it. No one can force me to wear something. They say it's kind of like an empowerment for me. It's my choice. And then, as I said, it is a way of, hijab is considered as a way of life for most people, for who choose to wear it. And they don't just look at it as a covering. They look at it as a way of life for them. And also with when people there's a misconception of oppression, there's a misconception that they don't express individuality. See, where they take, as the honorable speaker before me has talked about it, that they style it on their own. There's a growing fashion industry to meet the increasing demand. This is this expression of individuality. There are accessories, there are different materials, colors that they use to make it more fun for them and to express themselves as a person. Now, when we talk about masks, when on the onset of COVID-19 and the face mask mandate, there was different opinions. There was, this is oppression by the government. This is a symbol of my responsibility to everyone around me, for my family, for myself. This mask is liberating for me to get on with my life even during this pandemic. And eventually, a majority of us have accepted the mask. It became a fashion statement and an expression of individuality. If you can see, this is pictures of Indian bridal masks, where women have decorated the mask matching to their dress. We have different sorts of masks. Everyone wants to, has their own choice. They match it with their dress. They're doing so many things. And then this is also a model who designed this mask and headset, where you can cover your head and also wear a mask match with it. In fact, in Malaysia, now they have two different products. They have masks, and they have masks for women who already wear the head covering, so that they can take the mask around their ears over the scarf. They're actually trying to integrate the head covering and wearing the masks together. So in conclusion, I would like to talk about what we can hope for the post-COVID era. People who have always wore face coverings were more open to were received with hostility, with judgment, but all of a sudden, everyone around them looks like them now. And this is actually, I have given the link here. This is an interview of different Muslim women during this COVID era. And now they say that everyone suddenly understands it. Everyone said, no one is picking me out in this time. And the hope is that this empathy will continue after the COVID pandemic, and that people will understand the need to cover oneself, whatever the reason may be. So I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sumaiya. This has been very enlightening to me, particularly because I didn't know how widespread. First of all the countries, you know, you are a world citizen, yes, of the world, it's very interesting. You talked about the Muslim, and people usually associate it with Muslim, the religion, oppression, like you said. But there's so much more. There's fashion, there's liberation, there's individuality, there's a choice. All these things you've talked about, I am just awed and thinking, wow, it's good to really broaden one's horizon. And I think actually the fact that we have had to wear masks here in the US has really broadened a lot of people's horizon. And we're learning to make it part of the fashion, you know. So thank you so much, Sumaiya. I really appreciate your presentation. And we have another global citizen, Dr. Mohammed from the University of Georgia, who is going to take the discussion to the global media and also include the religious perspective. Dr. Mohammed?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am so happy to be here, and I'm happy to learn from you all. And I'm just glad that my presentation follows Sumaiya's and Kerry's, because they really resonate with what I'll be talking about. And one of the things that I want to share before I even proceed is that we have to examine the ways in which the coronavirus sort of disproportionately affects marginalized people, especially when we think of them within the context of gender and religion and ethnicity, and also even nationality. And I also want us to think about how face coverings sort of, in a way, can further marginalize these groups or mitigate marginalization of these groups, like Sumaiya just talked about. And we also, when we talk about face coverings, especially within the global North context, it's important to understand why we've had a lot of resistance, to this. And I saw in one of the comments or the questions in the comments, people asking whether if we want to look back in history to see what we could learn from history, whether attitudes could change. And I think that's something interesting to explore. And it's also interesting to understand why we have a lot of resistance, especially in the West or the global North, to masking, because of the ways in which health has been seen as like an individualized, you know, concept where people don't think about public health with regards to the community, communalism or collectivism. And it also points to the conversation that is currently going on globally about why Africa is doing so well as far as mitigating the spread of the virus is concerned. And the reason is because Africans are taking it seriously, and public health is something that is done communally as a group. That's one of the major reasons. And there are other reasons that we could explore. So when we connect the resistance to the use of masks here in the US or in the West, to the ways in which it has been embraced, and also physical distancing has been embraced in specific communities that value collectivism and communalism and value lives, you know, human lives and the health of others just as much as their own health. It's important to think about all these things. And one other point I'd like to mention that is sort of connected to what Sumaiya was talking about was that, you know, in other cultures, so I come from northern Ghana, which is predominantly Muslim, so that's a tiny population of Ghana, and veiling or using a head covering within my specific culture and growing up, conversations around veiling had to do with marriage, you know, for women, right? So you would wear a veil to show that you were married, and if you did not wear a veil, you were automatically read as unmarried. And so like the idea of wearing a ring to show your marital status was not really, did not really take off until much recently within this part of the country. So when we talk about face coverings, it's important to connect it to like specific cultural ways in which, you know, they manifest, right? And even head coverings also has a gendered element where we think about, you know, African women covering their heads, and also, you know, African men covering their heads traditionally with you know, these various types of hats that we've had. So now I want to talk about the media and the connection to face coverings. So in recent times, you know, wearing a mask, especially within the era of the coronavirus, and I'll talk specifically about Ghana, has been really interesting to observe, because in the past, you would see that when journalists went out to interview people, especially when they did video reports, they did not follow a lot of the ethical standards that they should be following as far as protecting the identities of their subjects are concerned, if the information they are getting from their subjects could have, you know, negative repercussions on the lives of these subjects. So now that we live in a COVID era and everyone is being encouraged to mask up and wear a mask to protect themselves and others from contracting the virus, we are seeing more and more that the identities of subjects are inadvertently being protected because they're wearing masks, right? So, you know, people can speak freely about whatever ideas they have to share without fearing any repercussions that could negatively affect them, or even fearing for their own safeties. And I'll use an example that recently happened in Ghana, where journalists went into a local school to interview students about, you know, the school feeding program, and the students didn't have very great things to say about, you know, the feeding program, which meant that the government was not shared in a very good light. And you would notice that in that video, every single person in the room had their face covered. So of course their identities were automatically protected in that way. But interestingly, the one student who spoke up, because, you know, she wanted to emphasize her point, you know, briefly took off her mask to speak. And in that sense, you would see that even though the mask is supposed to sort of protect your identity and also protect you from contracting the virus, it didn't really work out for her in that context. And another thing that we will also look at within the field of media is the work of journalists, and how precarious it can be, and how it can make them susceptible to contracting the virus because of the traveling and interaction with people to get, you know, to gather reports and share with the public. So masking in this way, especially for the people, on the part of the people with whom the journalists interact, helps protect journalists and the subjects from, you know, spreading the virus. And when we look at the gender aspect of you know, face coverings and masking, which Sumaiya has talked about, it sort of intertwines with religion to produce a specific lived reality. And I'll talk about the burqa ban in France and in many European countries, and how that has affected Muslim women within these countries, and also compare it to what is happening in Canada, where they have put out directives to say that women who wear the burqa, even during the period of coronavirus, these are the things that they need to keep in mind. If they need to enter a space to do something, they have to call ahead. Like, they've been provided with the resources to sort of navigate this new reality that we find ourselves in. But on the other end of the world, in Europe, this has not happened at all. Actually, the French government has come out to say that they are even strengthening restrictions on the burqa ban within France. And I'm glad that Sumaiya talked about this. I showed you all the images because you can see the difference between a hijab and a niqab and a burqa. Right? So in France, women are not allowed to wear a burqa. They are not even allowed to wear what is called a burkini, which is like, a woman wearing a burqa in the form of a bikini to be able to swim in public pools. So there's a lot of restrictions around that, even though there is hope that it might change attitudes of the general public, because looking at the way that we're all wearing masks these days, the physical appearance of everyone who's wearing a mask, especially if they have a head covering, is no different from someone who's wearing a niqab, right? And it also calls into question the issue of Islamophobia and how that connects to this new reality that we find ourselves in. So if the French government is saying, oh, even though you're supposed to wear a mask, you still cannot wear a burqa or a niqab, does the same rule apply to nuns who cover their hair and would wear a mask? Because if you look at them in the physical appearance, they would look like they were wearing a niqab, right? So it calls into question issues of Islamophobia. And it also sort of how does it create a new identity for niqab wearers? And it's also important to think about how education about using these masks sort of connect to hijab wearers or burqa wearers or niqab wearers, and how we can move towards a conversation where we try to destigmatize perceptions about Muslim women who wear any type of head covering, right? And I also want to think about what it means for Islamophobia across Europe and even North America, and what that also means for Muslim women or Muslims who cover their head or who wear any type of facial covering in border crossings, because we always talk about surveillance and what that means for visible Muslims who are, Muslim women who cover their hair or wear any type of covering. So I hope that, these conversations that we are having will cause us to reflect extensively on the cultural implications, the gender and the religious implications of wearing masks within this, coronavirus reality, where wearing a mask can, intertwine or blur, can blur into the religious identities that are sort of portrayed or presented to the public. So, and I also want us to think about media in relation to, the coronavirus and the face coverings and what that means for ethical and responsible journalism and how we can take away from that. Because what we learn from what journalism looks like as far as video reports today is concerned is that, you can do a video interview with someone wearing a mask and still tell the story without having them take it off. So what does that mean for our future reality of protecting the identities of our subjects as journalists and protecting the identities of people who may try to speak truth to power, but who fear doing that because of the repercussions that they may experience. That's all I have to share with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. I have a feeling you have much more to share.
I do that.
Yes, well, thank you so much. That was so instructive, and coming at it from both a journalistic and an academic point of view and a personal point of view was very invigorating to me personally. I liked the way you talked about various responses by countries, European countries, Canada, France, and all of that, how that has, how they see it, how people see it, and the misperceptions and movements based upon actually having to wear this mask and how that has helped with empathy. Also, what struck me also was how you kind of made a connection between the Muslim religion, people having to wear masks and veils, and the nuns. You know, I haven't really thought about that in terms of, that's a connection that people don't generally make. So that was very interesting to me. Well, 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 thank you so much. We have finished with our presentations, and thank you so much for taking us in different directions, all in the bid to educate us. I'll now go over to Laura Fuller. She's a special projects coordinator with the School of Graduate Studies, and she will help us with the questions that have come up during the presentations. Thank you, Laura.
Okay, that was really, really informative for me and very thought-provoking. And just want to encourage you, if you have a question that you haven't put in the chat, it's not too late. So as we're going through these, feel free to add any additional questions. And I will start with the first question that was, I believe, presented by Dr. Fahimi. And it is, do you think that more community education on the history of masks can lead to less resistance to wearing masks? So I know that Dr. Gaddis was talking about the history of masks, so he may want to comment on that, but also we can open it to discussion as well.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, both from the sense that I was talking about in terms of masks as part of a kind of expressive culture, I think allow us to lend a kind of more positive connotation to mask wearing, which perhaps might make it more appealing. But I think there's also, and perhaps Dr. Cam can speak to this as well, but you know, there's a very long history of masks as a medical technology, and we've known and used these for well over a century. I mean, at least dating back. This is not my area, but at least dating back to some earlier pandemics, right? And so I think there's, you know, in that case, maybe there's a community shaming to be done about what, I don't mean that literally, but there's community education perhaps to be done about what we know and have known for a long time in terms of the efficacies of wearing masks as a prevention of disease. I'm not sure how convincing it is in terms of thinking of mask as a kind of cultural expression to get people wearing them. So I guess my answer would be a little bit of yes and no, and it would depend on the kind of historical education.
So from a medical standpoint, actually the wearing of masks in medical environments didn't come until pretty late in the 1800s and early 1900s. And, you know, again, previous to that, you know, a number of diseases that we saw weren't being looked at as respiratory spread diseases. A lot of them were considered blood-borne pathogens, you know, either through fleas and ticks and just poor hygiene in general. But, you know, if you look back historically at some of when physicians back then wore masks, it was mostly for to help prevent the odors or smells that were coming. Back then, you know, again, you know, people were not showering or bathing every day, so it wasn't uncommon for a clinician to have the equivalent of a handkerchief or something with some sort of something to mask the smell. But as far as the antiseptic part of wearing masks really came more later with the times of Dr. Lister and others, once we found out more, understood the germ theory and all those things. And then if you look back in the United States, you know, doing surgery, operations, even at the Mass General back then, that you know, the early operations surgeons didn't wear masks because it was something that was just not common. But once they figured out that breathing on a open wound site could cause infections, it quickly became popular. So yes, so there's that, the history part of it. Now, so let me give you the science as it relates to COVID, okay? The science as it relates to COVID, and now there are multiple studies available, because that was one of the questions that came up about what's the appropriate type mask. So your typical 2 or 3 ply mask that could be made from cloth, okay, will probably give you a level of protection up into the range of like 60%. Okay, there are variant studies that some say 40, some say 20, some say up to about 60% effectiveness. And it has to do with the filtration capacity and the wear capacity and how many layers and stuff. So the general rule I've used for people is with masks, the more uncomfortable the mask is to wear for the length of time, the better the mask is from a filtration standpoint. Okay, so like in the medical industry, we use the N95 as like the gold standard of the mask that we're using. Well, if you've worn an N95, okay, and we have to do it for hours on end. You see my team out at the parking deck swabbing people. They're an N95s, sometimes for 3 to 4 hours consistently before lunch break. That's why I have to give them a lunch break. And then after that, I can't, yeah. And then after that, they're in it for another 3 or 4 hours. Those are very uncomfortable masks to wear. They get very humid, very hot, and they're very uncomfortable, but they work effectively. That's what healthcare workers use who are in direct contact in an intensive care unit with patients with COVID. So we know those work really well. So cloth masks, somewhere up into the 60%. Then you have your typical triple ply surgical mask that you see a lot of people walk around with. And the qualities vary on how good they are. It's not just the layers or the filtration. Some of the better surgical masks actually have an electrostatic charge that also works to, and the chemical engineer will know about this, will help, again, filter out particles because of that electrostatic charge, okay? But for wide distribution, right now, cloth face mask, in addition to physically, socially distancing, and again, limiting your indoor environment, will work far and wide pretty effectively. Not everybody needs an N95. Not everybody will want to wear an N95. The only time I put on an N95 is when I am going into direct contact with a person under investigation, because that would be considered a high risk. So, all right, I hope that helps.
I was going to add, as a practitioner, I can tell you the toll that this pandemic has on all of us when it comes to our mental wellness. So we not only need more education, but if we understand that it's also part of prevention, the longer we're not complying and the longer we're not, following the standards, the longer we're exposed to all these crises and trauma. So I truly think it's about our health, but it's also about our quality of life. So more education, prevention, and this conversation needs to continue.
Yeah, and again, with regards to masks, it gives me a better level of well-being when I go out, whether it's to the grocery store or pumping gas or whatever I'm doing. You will always see me with a mask on, because it gives me, I know the science. Okay, I know the science and I know the data. And I think over a week ago, Dr. Redfield, who heads the CDC, and I agree with him, says that mask wearing is probably a better preventive strategy than a vaccine. Okay, I know that sounds kind of crazy, but we know that in many cases, the mask wearing will decrease the risk of contracting the virus, and probably could be more preventive, could be a better strategy than the vaccine. But Everybody's got to do it and everybody's got to adhere to it for it to work really well. So one other thing that I wanted to also just came out in the science within the last week, and that is, you know, we've always been saying that if you wear a mask, especially if you are someone who's infected, you are protecting the other people, okay? The science has now said that you are actually doing a significant impact on protecting yourself, because it has to do with your initial viral load when you get infected with the virus. And the science is there that shows that if at the time you are exposed to someone who is shedding the virus and that you're wearing a mask, that your exposure of the amount of viral particles will be significantly decreased to the point that you may have either an asymptomatic or a mildly symptomatic infection that takes place. So there's science that shows you're protecting other people, but there's science that shows you're protecting yourself and decreasing the severity of your own infection should you get infected. And the mask is a key factor to that.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Any other comments? Any other? Okay, we will go to the next question, and it's from Susie Webster. And this would probably be another question for Dr. Kim. What is the importance of taking the flu vaccine this year? And is there a noted difference in the symptoms of the flu versus COVID-19?
Absolutely great question. So I'll answer it by telling you that probably no other year more than this year, since I have been a clinician, and that's over 30 years, is the flu vaccine more important. And the reason is the symptoms of the flu are completely a crossover with the symptoms of COVID, except for one symptom, and that is loss of smell or taste. And loss of smell or taste, generally, what we've learned from this virus, does not happen until about the second to third day into the infection, okay? And also understanding, I'm giving you all a whole COVID lecture here, also understanding that on your first day of symptoms from COVID, okay, you were infectious 2 days before that. You were contagious to other people, okay? So there's a 2-day contagious asymptomatic period followed by the onset of symptoms. So why is it important with the flu shot? Because the second probable wave of COVID will come sometime late this fall, probably December or January is when we're predicting. Guess when the flu wave is expected? Same time, okay? So we are trying to avoid what's called a twindemic, right? An epidemic of the flu and an epidemic of a second wave of COVID. And the only way, you know, again, that's what's different with this virus, right? With the flu, we have a vaccine, generally that works every year, generally. Sometimes it doesn't, but generally does. So we have a vaccine, and we have multiple medications that can work against the influenza viruses. We don't have either with COVID, okay? That's the big difference. So to the extent that we can get as much of the population, which, you know, in previous years, about anywhere from 35 to just under 50% of the population actually gets a flu vaccine, okay? And even those that do get a flu vaccine, it doesn't work 100%, okay? Some people, it only works about 40, 60, 80% effectiveness. So in an effort to not overwhelm the healthcare entities, because every year we hospitalize tens of thousands of people for the flu, and every year we lose about 20 to 30,000 people die from the flu or flu-related complications. We're trying to avoid having as much flu. Now, the good thing is that because of COVID and the preventive strategies, In the southern hemisphere this year, during the summer months, what we consider summer months, which is their winter months, there was a very low incidence of flu because people were wearing masks and distancing and doing all those things. So we're hoping for a very small flu season this year because we're also doing the same stuff in the northern hemisphere. But one of the key strategies to help in this situation is getting a flu shot. I got mine 3 weeks ago. I normally do not get mine until the middle to late October, but I'm not messing around this year. And my team has also gotten their flu shot. So yes, absolutely, you should get your flu shot.
Thank you. I'll be getting mine soon.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Kim. Okay, we've got one more question for you. And from Asri, she says, I know the last virus happened in 1918. I believe she's referring to the Spanish flu pandemic. And now we have the COVID-19. Should we expect other viruses, or I would assume pandemics, in the next 100 years?
It will not surprise me if we don't see another pandemic or pandemic type situation within the next 5 years or 10 years. That would not surprise me. We've been waiting for this pandemic for the last 10 or 15 years. I mean, look at the numbers, right? Compared to 1918, I think our population is more than 3 times what it is. Think of travel between countries and the rapidity with which travel will happen. When this virus broke out, we believe in, again, everything points to Wuhan, China is where it started. By the time we figured it out, it was already in South Korea, in Thailand, in other places. And before we knew it, it was in Europe and all over. So the process of pandemic, I will tell you that, let me tell you part of why we did so well in Auburn, and this isn't trying to be arrogant. I've been preparing for this pandemic for years, okay? So when on January 9th, I emailed Dr. Gillespie, okay? I already had a plan in place ready to execute. That's number one. Just for, again, we already had in stock 2,095 masks that was part of our pandemic strategy. I had N95 masks, gowns, gloves, everything already in place. Hand sanitizer, gallons of it, okay? So when I sent Dr. Gillespie an email on January 9th, asking for him and the other international programs to please identify for us any students that came from the Wuhan or the Hubei province of China, okay? We were being proactive. We were trying to identify these students in an effort to educate them, to let them know we were here, to let them know what happens if they start developing any symptoms and what they should do, contacting the clinic, how we were going to handle it. All of that we had in place already. And then the same thing on January 9th, when I called my head nurse in and I said, I want you please to order as many N95 masks, hand sanitizer, gloves and gowns as you can order, okay, and get in stock. And she looked at me like, what is going on? And I said, there's a situation happening with pneumonia of unknown origin in China. I just have a bad feeling, let's go ahead and put in the order. Fortunately, because there wasn't a run on supplies yet and the warehouses were all pretty full here in the US, we've never ran out of PPE. We have right now, unless they really switch off the spigot, we have enough PPE here in the clinic to run for the next 6 months or more, okay, at our present rate of use. So we didn't get caught down. So I'm not sure I'm giving you a long answer, but bottom line is you will see this happen again. I will see this happen again in my lifetime, probably more than once, because as we encroach upon habitats, with wildlife, as we increase international travel, and as we increase domestic travel. I mean, there are parts of, of the world, Africa and Asia and other places where, roads are being built so that there's rapid transport, trains and high-speed trains and all sorts of stuff. And as we move people and interact closer with wildlife, there's no question we're going to have more pandemics, and they'll come faster than we realize.
Okay, so our next question was, let's see, also from Asri, and this is related to Sumaiya's discussion about wearing the hijab and other types of head and face coverings. And she says she wonders if the hijab wearers have had an advantage by using the hijab during COVID-19. So any thoughts on that? Just maybe especially earlier when they're already had a face covering when everybody else was still trying to figure it out.
So this has actually been a question. And this is very commonly, it comes in mind when you look at hijabs, and I have read different opinions on this. And when you look at the science of masks, as Dr. Kam has already explained, there is it is important to have your face covered, and then it is important on the ply and the structure and the build of the cloth material. So given that even with a 2-ply, you have only 60% a chance of protection, the science may not support that wearing something that is only covering, and it may usually be a more lighter material. So, but the fact is, it's more about whether they were able, people who have already worn masks or worn face coverings were more able to adapt to this changing environment much easier, much more easily, and being able to accept the changes that we have in this world much more easily. That is, I think, more of what we should be looking at. And because I'm a scientist, so I do not wish, I cannot at all say that there are substitutes to face masks. I will definitely support the science behind it first.
Yeah, that's a good point, though, that there is a curve of adjustment, not just the actual covering of your face, but just adjusting to wearing a face covering and communicating with a face covering.
And I will just say that the science has already shown that the ones where you wear on your neck and you pull up and it's it's made from other material beyond cotton is less effective. 20% or less. 20% or less is what the science says.
Yeah, actually, I learned that there was like a fake news story going around, which sort of points, connected to this question about how, hijab is, or people who wore the burqa or niqab were less likely to contract the virus. And it was debunked that it was not true, because most of the material, Dr. Kam said, for the hijabs and these face coverings are not cotton-based. And so first of all, they are not cotton-based. Also, they are not layered, like Sumaiya was saying. And so even some of the records or the cases that were recorded in Muslim majority countries like Pakistan and Iran point otherwise. So in Iran, the chador is very common, and they still had one of the highest cases in the world. So yeah, it's more than just that. And the story that I read about that talked about, that debunked this notion, also said that the hijab and all these other face coverings are loose face coverings. They don't fit snug, they don't fit snugly onto the face. And so there's also that to consider. You're still able to spread, infections that way.
Okay, good comments. Okay, so Dr. Gillespie had a good point to bring up, and it'll be interesting maybe to hear from some of the students how you feel about this. He says, early in the pandemic, Dr. Kim and the administration received many parent complaints about keeping their young students home after being abroad or after spring break. And some of our Asian students reported they felt discriminated against when American young people made fun of them for wearing masks at the grocery store. We are now well into the pandemic, 500,000 plus dead, and I wonder what those parents and young people think now. Have we matured? Any experiences in a change of perception of people's responses or comments?
So I'll comment.
Okay.
Yes, early on, Dr. Gillespie knows that we were receiving a lot of criticism from parents and even people in the community. I received phone calls and emails from people in the community back in February and March. What are we going to do with these Chinese students? Why are they still in Auburn? Blah, 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 blah. And it was pretty ignorant and ridiculous, to be quite honest. So, but we dealt with it. I had not many, I had a handful of phone calls and, you know, just kind of had to say at the time what we knew and what we didn't know. And I don't care. At this point, it doesn't matter. It's a pandemic. You know, it just took the WHO a little too long to say it was a pandemic. Those of us in medicine already knew it was a pandemic, at least 2 weeks or more before they declared it a pandemic. Okay, so that's number one. Yes, Dr. Gillespie is well aware, took a lot of heat. I know I did, a lot of heat from when we brought our students back from Italy and stuff, that I did not want them back in Auburn. Okay, I wanted them to go straight from wherever in Europe they were coming and go straight to their homes, wherever their parents were. Because again, we were dealing with a situation that we still didn't know a lot. Meanwhile, I'm watching what's going on in New York and other places and in Seattle. And I'm like, nope, we don't need that right now in Auburn. Plus, when we brought them back to Auburn, even if they were young and healthy, we already knew that there was a concern of asymptomatic spread. We did know that, okay? We didn't know the extent of it, but we knew it was happening. The likelihood was that it was happening. So yeah, I mean, I will tell you, you know, as some people say, some days you're the pigeon and some days you're the statue. I was definitely the statue that time, okay? And it's okay, right? A lot of parents let me know it and the students let me know it. But, you know, you had to stay the course because I had to look at the bigger picture of protecting the Auburn community campus and as well as beyond campus. So there was a lot of drama. And my hats off, I just want to tell you, my hats off to Andy Gillespie and all the folks, number of y'all are here, that when we made the decision and pulled the trigger to pull our students back from Italy on the Friday afternoon, I made the phone call to General Burgess. I'll just tell you now that we could talk about it. Back then we couldn't talk about it. At 4:38 on Friday afternoon, the last weekend in February, I called General Burgess and I said, we need to pull our students out of Italy. I believe the Italians are going to lose control of this situation based on what I'm reading coming out of Italy. We need to get them out. Our first student coming back from Italy was on a plane 6 hours later. Okay. And within that, by that following Monday, almost all of them were already back. Okay. So we lucked out. And then we made the decision we needed to pull all the other students back from international studies because, again, the signs were all there that this had already spread to other countries. You know, and Dr. Gaddis talked about you know, again, Afro-Caribbean and stuff. Carnival was wide open in the islands as well as in Brazil. And so when all of this was hitting, I'm like, this is going to get out of hand really quickly. And that's exactly what happened. So, yep, you know, sometimes in these situations, you got to make the tough decisions and take the criticism. And Andy and I and others took it.
I would like to make a comment on that based on what we see in downtown Auburn now, with most of everyone there not wearing masks. And I still feel like we still, maybe there is more to learn from what we see, because just as soon as Auburn said that, okay, you can be outside without a mask, you go to Auburn campus and no one is wearing a mask, even if they're in groups. And I was really surprised. I was like, maybe we still have more to learn and more to accept even now with 500,000 plus dead.
I am a huge proponent of masks indoors and outdoors. You will not see me in public or outdoors, even without a mask, except maybe in my house. I mean, in my yard, my personal yard. But other than that, you see me anywhere, you know, a mask is going to be on because the science supports it. You know, the science supports it. So, you know, am I a proponent of relaxing the outdoor or the wearing a mask in general, including outdoors? No. The governor's office knows exactly my opinion on that topic. So does the Auburn administration. So.
And I also think there's a scary space that as a community, we are also having this misconception and thinking of masks according to our political affiliation. Again, we're missing the point of being safe and healthy. So hopefully we can do more education around that.
That's a good point.
Agreed.
And I think, you know, our decisions aren't, many of people in our community and in our country may not make their decisions based on the science. So that can be a tough one when, and I'm sure it's frustrating for people like Dr. Cam in healthcare.
It is. It's very frustrating. So let me share another quick thing, and I don't want to hog the whole discussion, but let me share a quick thing that has really hammered my colleagues in healthcare. And these are the ones who are way closer to the front lines than I am. And that is the nurses and the techs and some of the doctors who cared and continue to care for people with COVID, but more so, you know, in the earlier months up until just a couple of weeks ago, where someone will be dying from COVID and they will be alone because we could not have family in there with them. And we have never faced a situation like that. So it emotionally drags on a healthcare clinician when you're trying to care for the person and there's no other people at the bedside as they take their last breath. Okay, so that you know, that's why we've had to focus also on the mental health of my colleagues who are dealing with that. I'm not dealing with that. I'm so far back from the front line, but they are, and I feel for them.
And, you know, anybody who's in the hospital for another reason is alone as well, because the hospital policies are usually no visitors.
So we've lightened up on those restrictions. There are a few of us physicians who keep up with the science, Dr. Maldo, myself, and Dr. Roberts, and we did discuss this with the hospital administration. So that has changed, including allowing a family member of a patient who has COVID, as well as people who don't have COVID, allowing a family member to be with them. Yes, we have changed that. The science supports it.
Yeah, and that can, I mean, for just mental health, all other reasons, that can really be so helpful.
Can I ask a question, Laura? Probably for Dr. Cam. Earlier you had mentioned, earlier you had mentioned the mutation of the virus and how it's fairly stable right now. Can that mutation rate change?
Yes, viruses can do whatever they want, and they've taught us that. And we've been tracking these mutations, and there are multiple mutations, and it's been helpful, right? It's been helpful because we know that the virus that started the outbreak in Seattle is different from the virus that started the outbreak in New York. We know that because of the mutational differences. What we would like to see happen is that this SARS-CoV-2 virus mutates into a less contagious or almost inert form. And we saw part of that happen with the original SARS, okay? Remember, the original SARS was just so bad, and then all of a sudden, poof, it disappeared. It didn't completely disappear. It just mutated into that situation. We haven't seen it with this one yet, and we think we're unlikely to see it. But yes, that's what a virus can do. Now, the big difference with the original SARS virus compared to the SARS-CoV-2, the original SARS virus, when you got exposed, you started getting very sick within hours. So you were easily identified. This one, you can get infected and have no symptoms, okay? Or you can get infected and be contagious for 2 days before you start symptoms. So that's why this one is so more widespread, so much more contagious, but not as deadly as the first SARS virus, but that's because we were able to identify it early. This one we're identifying later.
It's interesting to me that we're understanding the biology more and more, and we're seeing differences, for example, between age groups. But then you overlay this sociological or anthropological layer on top of the biology, and you get various exposures or risk factors around the world due to cultural differences. And then if you think longer term, is there any evolutionary response by humans to a cultural difference? Are cultures that wear masks as part of their daily life, are they more resistant over time? And will they outlast those cultures that don't wear masks?
I'm not an anthropologist or historian, so I can't answer that part. I will tell you that if you look right now, okay, and people question the information, but China, with as large a population as it has, they don't even come close to the numbers that in a lot of other countries. Taiwan, who was a lot smarter because they had to deal with the first SARS virus, they've had, I don't think Taiwan has even had 10 deaths yet from this virus, despite their close interaction and trading with China. So, and those are, or in Japan, and those countries that do wear masks, but it's not just wearing the mask, it's the cultural and the historical significance of it. Wearing the mask, most of those people wear masks historically because they may have cold symptoms or something starting, and so they put on the mask to protect everybody else. That's their mentality, okay? So because of that care for and being respectful of others, I think they've done a better job. You know, they don't get caught up in their individual constitutional rights. They get caught up in their care and concern and respect for the other people that they're going to ride the subway with, or they're going to be in an office with. So they're far more advanced in their thinking and their caring than other countries.
And that actually really relates well to this next question. Says that one speaker, it was Dr. Muhammad, alluded to the sense of community as being one reason the African countries have done so well during the pandemic. Are there other reasons, such as an authoritarian type of government, genetic makeup, experience with AIDS, Ebola, etc.?
Yeah, I believe I will defer the genetic makeup question to Dr. Kam, but I'll talk about the others because that is not my field of expertise. Yeah, so I think among other reasons why, African countries were able to deal with this, because it also seemed like many Western countries were waiting. I think it was Bill Gates who said that, there were going to be bodies on the streets of Africa because of the corona. It was really interesting to see the expectations of the world versus what the reality is currently as far as the way the continent has dealt with it. And one of the reasons is that because of the AIDS and Ebola, issues that Africa dealt with in the past decades, many African countries have the infrastructure to deal with this type of issue, within the region. So when Ebola broke out a few years ago, there were like measures that were put in place. They had like a station in Ghana where they would distribute, the various things that they needed in these areas that were affected by Ebola. And then I would say that another thing that many African countries have done that the North or the global North has not done very effectively, or the US specifically has not done a good job of, is how massive the educational campaigns have been about the virus, right? So there were a lot of educational campaigns in Ghana, and I'll talk about Ghana, which I know, which is a context I know about. There were a lot of educational campaigns in Ghana about the virus. Like there was a lot of education going around about the spread of it. And even at points where the state fell short as far as educational campaigns were concerned, individual citizens rallied around to provide educational campaigns in indigenous languages, not just in English, so that it would be as accessible as possible to the populace. Another thing that happened in Ghana and many African countries were the lockdowns, right? The entire country went into lockdown for weeks to mitigate the spread of the virus, which I did not see here in the US, not really. Maybe New York, I'm not sure that we had that in many other states within the country, and people were also very resistant to that. And another thing that I noticed within the Ghana context was that we totally shut down our airport for months. We didn't open our airport till like the 1st of September when this happened. So people could not leave the country and people could not come in, so that we were trying to like slow the spread of the virus. And then there was also the issue of mandatory isolations for people coming in even after, the airports had been open. So I had friends who were going into Ghana. They had to like get tested for the virus and show their tests. And if you were not able to show that, you tested negative for the virus, there was like this mandatory isolation. They would pick you right from the airport, and then they would take you to a place to isolate you for 2 weeks before you could go reunite with your family. And I didn't really see much of that happening here in the US and in other countries. So I think these, among other reasons, were why African countries were able to deal with it. And the lockdown also happened in other African nations. So I'm just going to go to Dr. Kam to talk about the genetic makeup.
Yes, so let me say, first of all, yes, some countries actually did a very good job of locking down. New Zealand, Australia. And with that came a significant decrease and almost zero new cases for weeks because of their lockdown. I talked to my cousin who lives in the Isle of Man, right off the coast of England, just this weekend. And, he can't come to the United States, even though he's a British citizen and all that stuff. It's not happening right now. Let's talk a little bit about the science, and Sumaiya might know some more. But there is definitely a genetic piece to it. That data has just started to come out. We are finding, for example, people who have autoantibodies to interferon, okay, seem to have more severe cases and possibly a higher mortality rate than those who do not. That's something that just recently been reported in the last few days. If you remember early on, there was also talks about blood types, that some people with some blood types were more prone and stuff. We believe that there is going to be genetic basis because, our immunity is based on a few different things, right? It's all based predominantly on white blood cells, but there are B cells that make antibodies and T cells that kill actual organisms, be they viruses, bacteria, whatever. And we need both parts of our immunology to work well. And, some do better with B cells and antibody, and some have no antibody. So one of the things we found out early on with this virus is that up to 20% of people who have had the virus, okay, were not forming antibodies, and we didn't know why. Okay? We're starting to learn why. So antibody testing was not going to be the only strategy we could use to show any degree of immunity. And we're also starting to learn now that different people at different stages are losing those immunity markers, such as neutralizing antibodies and measurable antibodies. And some are losing it 60 days, some are losing it 90 days, some are keeping it. So there's going to be genetic reasons for all of that. We're just still figuring it out. We still haven't solved the question of how long immunity lasts. We don't know the answer to that yet, but our prevailing thought right now is you're good for about 90 days. Okay, we have found where we have documented cases of reinfection, but the number is so small compared to the millions of people that have had this infection that we don't think it's going to be as big an issue for right now. Now, you know, ask me a year from now, and we may start seeing a bunch of people getting reinfected, maybe in milder cases, but that may happen. It's happened with the common cold. Remember, the coronaviruses that we know about the most is the 4 coronaviruses that is one of the causes of the common cold. So, you know, we know a lot about that, and we know that the immunity from those viruses usually don't last more than a year.
We have a really great kind of cultural observation comment from Mirliana, who she says originally from Indonesia. She says the recent COVID-19 spread in the United States has seen people wearing masks in public as a more common sight. But this phenomenon has long been a norm in Asia, where face masks are often worn regardless of whether a person is ill. It's very common in Asia, especially among young people. I even read that there is a lookism culture in South Korea. So students, especially female students, will use the mask to hide their faces when they don't have makeup on. Also, a lot of Asian celebrities wear masks to hide their face from the public. So I feel like that also influenced it to become a fashion trend. In my country, Indonesia, people wore masks even before the coronavirus outbreak because of air pollution, especially in big cities. Now, Eastern countries have an additional reason, a more urgent reason to wear a mask. I can see that it has been an underlying cultural narrative as to why people wear masks. Do you think wearing masks will become a kind of culture in the United States in the future? So, open question for the group.
I think mask wearing will become a fashion statement, just like caps and hats and stuff. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion. I hope that happens, but yes, I think that will happen now that, I mean, now you can find masks in all kinds of colors and shades, sizes, and it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So,
Dr. Gillespie mentioned earlier that some of the domestic students thought it was weird at first that the Asian students might have been wearing their masks in the grocery store, and so I would imagine that what she's talking about here, you know, influenced that it wasn't abnormal for, you know, students from certain countries to wear a surgical medical style mask, and it's been a very different sight. It's an adjustment sight to me to go somewhere and look around and see everybody with, you know, I like to communicate and see people's facial features when they're talking. So it's definitely an adjustment for me as somebody from the U.S. But I see the need and the importance of it.
I would like to comment is that, as Dr. Camp said, that this is not going to go away for the next 2 or 3 years, the effect of this pandemic. And this is going to become a norm for the next 2 or 3 years. And also what is predicted is that there are going to be more pandemics more often with the coming years. And it's like now people will be prepared for it. And maybe who are scared, who have already learned their lesson, they will always have it in hand that I'm going to put it on when I need to, when I'm going to a crowded space, I'm going to always have this on. I have like, I have family who live in New York, and they have severe PTSD from what happened in New York. And there are people in New York who don't want to get into the subway without wearing a mask, even if they've had it or not. And so maybe, yeah, it will be people who will be kind of taking it in as a norm over the next few years.
And I also like, if I can say, the only silver lining of a pandemic like this is a moment of reckoning for all of us. We are to dismantle the status quo and changing those paradigm shifts that we have when it comes to the way we present. So if this pandemic is teaching us anything, is empathy, understanding of each other's culture, but also thinking about the way we view the personal ethic, moral judgment with the collective. So it's very important to think about that.
Well, we are close to the end of our time, and there's a few more questions. Susie posed the question, is there a resistance to wearing masks greater in the South or in specific communities?
Yes.
Anybody have any insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm coming here. This is my first semester at the University of Georgia, and I'm coming here from Pennsylvania. And the one thing that struck me was that I went into a store with my partner, and we're the only people wearing masks. And I was so shocked because that's the norm where we're coming from. And I don't know whether it's because we're also closer to Philly and New York with the higher records of cases, but it was definitely a culture shock for me. And I also noticed that here people are more likely to not follow the distancing rules. Like in the stores, I'm always trying to go like twice the distance when I try to check out, and I see people just like want to stand close behind me, and it's really unnerving. I think it's definitely a cultural difference thing. That was my experience when I got here, and I just thought it was interesting.
So Laura, there's a great question about face shield and whether or not that adds. So I know we don't have a lot of time. The easy answer to your question is yes. Putting on a face shield with a mask does increase the protection. And Sumaiya may chime in more on that. But what the face shield does, it decreases the larger respiratory droplets from getting onto your face. For me, the better reason that I would wear a face shield, and I do wear one time to time, is because when you have a mask on, you inadvertently don't realize that you are adjusting your mask or touching your face with a contaminated hand. And so before you adjust your mask, you really should cleanse your hands. Well, I don't always think like that. But when I am in with a patient with an N95 and a face shield, if I want to scratch my eye or scratch my cheek, I got to get my hand up under the face shield. So I'm more than likely not going to do that. So that, those two reasons, blocking larger respiratory droplets and decreasing your touching of your face makes a difference. So now, what about using a face shield without a mask? Okay. Face shields are not nearly as effective as masks are. And actually, I think the science is showing that just wearing a face shield is probably giving you about somewhere between a 20 to 30%, okay, which a cloth mask made with cotton, at least 2-ply or 3-ply, will more than double that protection. So, Sumaiya, you want to say anything about that?
No, I think you covered it completely. It's just an added. The face shield is an added protection, but what the science of actually protecting yourself and your respiratory system is basically having to have no air, the having a closed protection more. And I completely agree with whatever you said.
Okay, well, we actually, it looks like we finished with all our questions. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Laura, and for helping us with the Q&A session. I think we have all learned so much. We are not the same as we were at the beginning of this session. we've moved. I want to say thank you so much to our presenters, Dr. Gaddis, Dr. Kam, Ms. Baharanyi, Ms. Islam, and Dr. Mohammed. You are excellent presenters, and we have enjoyed listening to you. We appreciate you being a part of our program, and we definitely will have you back one way or the other post-COVID. We appreciate what you've done, being a part of this, and thank you so much for your participation and for leading us through this discussion. Thank you, Laura, for the Q&A as well. Okay, there are other programs that we have in the International Cultural Center. Please check us out at our website that's already posted in the chat. And we have recorded this session. So if you would like a copy of it, ask, please, all you have to do is ask. And if you're a faculty member and you want to use parts of this or all in your class, please feel free to contact us and we will be very happy to get this to you as part of the experiential learning part of what we do at the International Cultural Center. Thank you so much. And if there are no more comments and questions, at this point, I'd like to say we're already out of time anyway, it's 1 o'clock. Next time, we'll treat you all to lunch. So thank you so much, and thank you to everybody. And this should wrap up the Window to Your World session, face coverings around the world. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Great.
Bye, everyone.